So welcome, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Board. Good morning, Chief. I'm joined here by Mr. Howard Morton, who will be assisting me with my presentation. I am Knia Singh, Community Liaison from the African Canadian Coalition of Community Organizations. I'm also the co-founder of the Osgood Society Against Institutional Injustice and the senior advisor to that group. Good morning, Mayor Crombie and Mayor Jeffrey. Today, I made my way here because it's very important, as you said, Mr. Chair, that the community provide input, especially on policing issues and especially in today's climate and the issue of carding, street checks, arbitrary detention. And I feel as a citizen of the GTA, born Canadian, that it's also my duty to assist government, police, and any other agencies that have to provide safety to the community and work with the community to be someone that can be a liaison, a voice of reason, someone that can assist in the whole process. I first want to start off by complimenting the Peel Police Board for the tremendous progress that I've seen in the past year and a half. I think it takes a lot of courage. I know that the force has been under pressure, and I know there's historical issues that have tainted some of the relations between the community and the police. But as someone that has been working hard on this issue, I do recognize that it takes a lot of courage to make progress, and I do want to acknowledge that you have and commend you for it. I will also say that I've had recent interactions with Peel Police concerning issues, and I've had very good response and service from them, which makes me fortunate and hopeful that it continues. Although I say that, I do have to acknowledge there are also many stories and interactions that I hear that are not so positive and that are not so helpful to community and the way of building community trust. So as an organization and as a community, I think together we can ensure that going forward, negative experiences decline and positive ones increase. First, I want to talk about the new carding regulations that were put into place that take effect in January 1st, 2017. I'm not aware of any draft policy that the Peel Police Board has put forward for public review, but I would advise if there is a policy being worked on, please contact community members, professionals, legal professionals, and myself, and I'm sure Howard would make ourselves available to assist if there's any input required. The reason why I say this is because in Toronto, the community input and legal input has been very helpful in crafting a policy that meets the needs of both the police to ensure their duties as police officers, and also that citizens' rights are protected under the Charter and all of our laws. Three major points about the policy that I asked the board to consider, Mr. Chair, is that there's rights notification that is paramount when it comes to these interactions. Basically, any stop by police on an individual, if it is premised with a notification of rights, that if it's not a criminal investigation, that this is a voluntary interaction, that you do not have to provide information, and you have the right to leave, that would alleviate all charter concerns. Because otherwise, if someone is being held against their will, they're being detained. And if they're detained, charter rights are triggered. And if that person is not under any criminal investigation, or they're not informed of their rights, the police service could be liable for any type of racial profiling, charter breaches, and I know that the board and the service does not want that to happen. So rights notification is paramount for any interaction with police and a civilian. Next is the issuing of a receipt. There is a mandate by the regulations to provide receipts. Now, the form of this receipt is up to the board, and I implore the board to take a look at the Toronto policy to see what additional information they've included in their receipt notification, and also implore the board to consider a carbon copy receipt. This way, you can monitor police behavior, and the person who is stopped has a copy of the interaction that took place. Without this form of carbon copy receipt, we could get into a situation where information is not consistent between the officer and the individual stopped. So that's a second recommendation to take a look at very carefully. And third is the legacy data, the historical data that is being kept on all these carding interactions. Now myself, I have been carded 11 times, stopped over 30 times. I haven't investigated the times I've been stopped in Peel, but I know I have been. Now, this data, for it to remain when it was collected illegally for one, and for two, the fact that it starts to create an impression of a person's identity without any criminal context is very concerning to the public. And this data, the public believes in, and legal professionals believe, it should be destroyed. However, there is a caveat, and the caveat is, a person like me who's launching civil litigation, if that data was destroyed, I would not be able to access that data for the purpose of a court hearing, and the police board themselves, the service, could be liable for destroying data that a civilian or citizen may need in order to do a civil suit. So the compromise being suggested by community members, or by myself, I'll say, is that this data be restricted, not accessed, and only accessible by the individual whose data has been collected themselves. Now, the Toronto Police have put forth in their policy that the data will be restricted only to the police and will only be called upon in extreme circumstances where the police provides authorization. However, still believe that that is still an affront to justice. It's using data that was illegally obtained, and it could have very negative repercussions and open up the board and the service to liability. Those are my comments. I don't have Mr. Morgan has to take this.
Have I done this right? Thanks. If I could just address one of the submissions you will hear, if you have not already heard, from police authorities with respect to the new regulation and in particular the data. One of the arguments frequently made, I believe in Peel by your chief and others, is that getting rid of street checks, which has already happened hopefully, and maintaining the new regulation is going to present a danger to the public because it is going to interfere with the police ability to investigate crime. Actually, the opposite is true. And I appreciate that at first blush that sounds foolish. Here's why it's actually putting Peel residents in danger. You're aware, as I am, that take any particular crime that occurs, a shooting at 10 o'clock at night. 20 or so people witness parts of the shooting or have information they could give to the police in assisting their investigation. When the police arrived, nobody saw anything, nobody has anything to say. Fear of retribution may well be a major reason for the public's reluctance to assist the police, but the total lack of trust in communities brought about by street checks, or carding as it's called in Toronto, and by the retention of this data and access to it historically as we go forward, is a major cause of mistrust and a reluctance on the part of members of the community to assist the police. So the bad guys who did the shooting, the investigation is stymied for one reason or another, including none of the witnesses came forward. The bad guy is still out there and the public are at risk. So when you're considering the police position that if you follow the reg and order that historical data be destroyed, you're going to put the public at risk, please consider the converse of how the public are now at risk because of the lack of trust caused by street checks.
Mr. Singh and Mr. Morton, we have 1 minute if you want to pick it up.
Okay.
That shows how interested they are.
Okay.
Wow.
Mr. Morton will address briefly the external equity audit that we also implore the board to keep undertaking. But I did want to actually talk about the atmosphere in Peel on the board and with the police service. From my impression, everyone here has the will to do right and wants a safe community. But from my understanding and from reports I'm receiving and hearing, there is tension between board members, service members, and the chair himself. And I just want to say, I think that it's very important that everyone works together. I don't think anybody here has ill intent. I know we're all coming from different positions, different backgrounds, and different experiences, but we have to put those aside because community safety is of utmost importance. And respect to the chair should always be given, and respect for senior officers should always be given. So without going too far into that, I just want to remind the board and even members of the board that may be leaving, it's disappointing if they were to leave because there's so much information that this board has brought together and moved progressively towards.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Any questions or comments?
I just want to thank you for your deputation, and it was very worthwhile, and I think we all learned something from you. A question on the retention of the data. I think the regulation says that we can retain it for 5 years, is that correct?
No, it's permanent.
5 years?
It's restricted after 5 years.
It's restricted after 5 years. So is your comment, are you asking us to allow access after 5 years, or even the current data that is, well, the current data will be grandfathered and be restricted, I believe, right?
Yeah, I'm asking that the board restrict the data immediately.
Immediately?
Yeah, because that's at the discretion of the board.
And that the individual also have access to it so they understand what is on their file.
Definitely. The reason for not asking for a complete deletion of the data is in case that individual wants to launch a claim, and if the board deletes it, then they'll be liable. So restrictable only to that individual.
And I think this is a worthwhile conversation for the board and the chief to have. So we're not making commitments, but certainly we've heard you. We will be having that conversation going forward. And with respect to the equity audit, of course, we passed the motion, we do intend to proceed.
Yes, I guess we put that on because
Our
our
understanding
understanding is there's
Hiring program being suggested by the chief, and I guess we just wanted to make sure that that is not being considered as an external equity audit, but that the board is going forward with its earlier position.
Right, well, the equity audit we were describing was far more sweeping than just on hiring process. So yeah, so there's lots we can learn.
Thank you.
I too wanted to thank you for your thoughtful presentation, and I think you raised some very interesting components to how we move forward with street checks and the regulations that the chief has. I think she's done the initial run at it, but I think we certainly appreciate your advice as to how to make how the data is collected. That particularly is of interest to me, and the issuing of a receipt is very is interesting as well. I haven't heard that particular recommendation be made, so I think that you've offered us a lot to think about as a board, and I appreciate your advice today. Will you be submitting something in writing to this board rather than just a deputation on your 3 recommendations for review?
Yes, I can. I will.
I guess I would like to say thank you for your initial comments. It has been a challenging 2 years, and certainly we've come a long way, and I think community safety is paramount for this board, and I appreciate your advice and your thoughtful recommendations. And we will be continuing. My understanding with the equity audit is that our new executive director is in the process of looking at individuals who are qualified to do the audit. At this point, he's relatively new to the job, so my understanding is we'll be getting some information about those who are qualified to do the job in the coming weeks, and we'll be making a decision as a board.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Chief, you have a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just I was confused by the hiring program that's being suggested that I'm running, so I'm not aware of any new hiring program, so I just thought I would put that out there. I would encourage Mr. Singh and Mr. Morton to stay for the results of our community survey that are going to be announced very shortly. So we've hired an external company, PRA Incorporated. Mr. Kerry Dangerfield is going to be presenting. And today we're revealing statistics that'll say our community satisfaction remains high at 93%. Every 3 years, we do a strategic plan. We do a community survey to find out what the community wants from our police service, how we are being rated. So today, and I'll give you some copies to take with you, so 93% of our residents are satisfied with the work of Gilroy Police. This is a 6% jump since 2013. 92% say we are professional, 91% say we're courteous, 90% say we treat people with respect, 90% say we are knowledgeable and competent, and the numbers go on. And to Mr. Howard Morton's point about the cooperation to solve a crime, I have been concerned, and I've been discussing the crime trends recently with the board, with the increase in shootings and the increase in stabbings, but the comment you made about the fact that people are refusing to cooperate with police because of the lack of trust between our community and Peel Region Police, I think the statistics will show today that that's incorrect. That overall residents and businesses indicated that they are willing to cooperate with Peel Region Police to solve a crime. They're at 96%, so I can give you these documents to say, or I encourage you to stay for the presentation. So I'm very pleased by the community results of what the community is telling us on how we are working with the community. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely, there always is, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and I do remember that you committed to me last year to have a community forum where the youth that we're in touch with address the Peel Police, and I do appreciate your statistics, those are great numbers. However, I think probably there's a huge portion of the community that hasn't been consulted, and the numbers, unfortunately, will probably be very different, but my schedule's been very busy, and I will take you up on that offer to have a community forum, and hopefully in the new year, we can do that so we can also get a reflection from another portion of our community that is served by police.
And Madam Mayor, I just wanted to remind you, since April 20th, Peel Region Police have implemented the new regulation guidelines, and we actually have a document as outlined by the ministry that we give to people when we are going to collect identifying information. So, and that has been issued out and discussed in previous meetings, but I brought copies with me today so the board can refresh the memory with those as well. So, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for reminding us. So there's a receipt issued currently today. We've already ahead of the scheduled introduction.
That's correct. As of April 20th, we are now collecting identifying information as per the regulation that comes effective January 1st. So Peel Region Police are the first police service. We issue a document. It's referred to as a document, not really a receipt. And on the back it talks about information with respect to the Office of the Independent Review Director to make a complaint, or they can access information on the Municipal Freedom of Information Act. It outlines the officer's name, the date, location where the stop occurred, so this person would be given this document.
I also asked, the deputant asked whether, or it suggested, recommended that there be rights notification. Is that currently being done as well?
That's correct, it is.
So they're notified, they don't have to give the information if they don't.
Yes, that's the very first thing the officers say to them is you don't have to talk to me. And the rights notification goes on. And I say, and also we've added to our website, Know Your Rights. We've obtained permission from the Civil Liberties Association that we could create a link from Peel Regional Police website directly to their website so people can jump on and know their rights. And we've been advertising that as well.
And then the final question would be, does the individual have access to their file?
Yes, anyone can make a freedom of information request for $5 and get access to that information.
Is that what this deputant was recommending, that through freedom of information you have access to your file?
Yes, it's a little bit outside the freedom of information. It's more a fact that the data would be restricted, nobody could access it, and only if they want to launch a civil suit or actually examine information they will do. So yes, it's under freedom of information, but in a different vein than it's currently used right now. Because the freedom of information that people access currently is still accessible by the police. In the new form that we're proposing, it wouldn't be accessible by the police, only that individual for their own purpose.
So, but currently, I believe the recommendation is that that be true after 5 years, is that correct? And is that true of the historical data?
So the regulation states that the documentation, the information would be restricted after 5 years. So currently, Peel Regional Police, we have committed to the board earlier this year that we would go back in time and we would restrict data. So we have been doing that since November 1st. So far, we have restricted over 24,000 documents, and we still have 74,469 street check records to restrict. We are in the process, and we will be compliant by December 31st. If it's January 1st, we will be compliant.
And so only the chief can access after 5 years, unless there's a freedom of information, unless the individual can access their information.
That's correct.
If I could just say, it all depends what you mean, or what the chief means by restricted. Restricted implies that there are exceptions, going to be exceptions to the rule. And I think the board has to be careful that the board delineates precisely what those exceptions are, and I suggest they should be very narrow. And secondly, that whenever an exception is employed by the chief or by an officer, that there be some sort of written report, not interfering with ongoing investigations, but some written report to the board or the chair indicating that on such and such a date, such and such was done, and access to that historical.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a long agenda today, so what I would suggest is, if you have specific suggestions, we welcome. Send them in an email to us as we are developing some of these policies. And
Just make a concluding comment based on the comment. So are there exceptions, Chief, where anyone else can access the data after 5 years?
Linda, do you want to assist with
Well, the
regulation?
regulation speaks to it, so right now we have to be compliant with the regulations. So when we look to the board policy and we will listen to, what your direction will be, at the end of the day, it has to be compliant with the regulations. So we look forward to reviewing that with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't mean to take more time than needed, but it is a conversation that I think the board should have.
absolutely, and we're going to do it.
Following up on it.
And the vice chair is spearheading this effort. And again, it's the regulation, the policy, the procedures. They all have to be in tandem. And we are making sure that, and we are ahead of the back, and we make sure that some of the input is taken into account, and we fine tune it, and we'll keep doing it as we go along. So, thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate you coming down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Board.
I need a motion to adjourn. Okay, seconded by Linda. All in favor?